Great. Excellent. So we'll just start with a quick overview of what is an OCP, or official community plan. Well, it's a plan that communicates the community's values, and it guides us as we make decisions about how we use land for housing, transportation, parks, environmental protection, economic development, and much more. So you can see it's a very all-encompassing plan, providing that future direction for Port Moody. So in practice, an OCP informs decisions relating to planning and land use management and provision of services in the community. And while an OCP indicates a desired direction, there are various instruments that the city has, such as zoning and development guidelines, that are required to implement the contents and the vision of the OCP. So why are we updating it? Well, all OCPs need to be updated regularly to reflect how the community is evolving over time. And most recently, with the new provincial housing legislation, municipalities will be required to update their OCPs now every 5 years. So that's something new that applies to all municipalities in British Columbia. And the Port Moody 2050 update started a while ago in 2020. It was at that time anticipated to be a targeted update to incorporate a number of master plans and strategies that had been completed since the last comprehensive update in 2014. But what in actuality happened was this update really evolved into more of a full refresh of the OCP, both in the form and the content. And you can see that in the draft 2023 OCP that was presented in December of 2023. All right. So again, in December 2023, staff presented a draft plan to Council for initial review with the full intention of continuing public engagement in 2024. However, in early 2024, the city made a difficult decision to pause public engagement on the plan due to the impacts of the new provincial housing legislation, that the impact that was going to have on our OCP as well as our zoning bylaw. So those were made late in 2023, and it took us a little while to really understand the full impact, and then we made the decision to delay the public engagement. So now we've restarted the process in 2025, and the update now needs to incorporate these new provincial housing legislative requirements into our OCP to account for specific housing targets to address local housing needs, changes related to new small-scale multi-unit housing. We'll get into more detail on that in the slides that follow, and also changes related to higher density development in transit-oriented areas. And so these are all, as mentioned, new requirements through provincial legislation in late 2023. Okay, so how have we engaged so far? We've been at this for a little while, as we mentioned earlier. So past engagement has included community surveys, a number of dialogue sessions, a neighborhood workshop for Seaview. And so while we started in 2020, this continued all the way throughout to 2023, again, with the full intention of completing the draft, which we did in 2023, but now have been delayed. So throughout this process, the impact, the input, the process, feedback was sought and summarized and incorporated into policy, really helping to shape that draft plan. So that's really been the foundation for re-engaging on in 2025 on the OCP update. So the OCP includes a vision. It's really the foundation of the plan. It's a clear, shared vision that defines and brings meaning to what's important for the future of Port Moody and guides the goals, objectives, and policies of the OCP that inform decision making. The community vision that's shown on the screen will be achieved through a number of community goals that are supported by a range of objectives and policies that guide decision making and shape the community. And so what you'll see in the actual draft, the 2023 draft, are all a list of objectives and policies that really all funnel into achieving this vision. And there's detailed information on our Engage Port Moody page for the Port Moody 2050 update that has a number of the information boards that were on display during the in-person sessions, but all of that information is available to anyone at any time through that page. So you can visit that at your convenience, and it will help provide a lot more detail to what is being presented in this presentation this evening. So just moving on to the provincial housing legislation. So as part of the Bill 44, how we refer to the legislation as by the bill numbers, this bill in particular required all municipalities to create an interim housing needs report. And the deadline for that was last year, I believe. That was completed last year. And the methodology for creating these was dictated by the province. So all municipalities were basically using the same methodology to understand both their 5-year housing needs as well as their 20-year housing needs. So you can see on the screen for Port Moody, that methodology produced a 5-year need of just over 3,000 new dwelling units and a 20-year housing need of just under 9,800 new dwelling units. So by December 31st of this year, Port Moody is required to update its official community plan and zoning bylaw to show that the capacity to meet those 20-year housing needs. So we're in the process of doing that right now. And we'll have to include those statements in our official community plan. So as well, Bill 44 included requirements that are referred to as small-scale multi-unit housing. So these apply to all single detached or single family, essentially, and duplex zoned lots in Port Moody. And there's quite a few, and we'll get to a map later on so you can basically see the distribution of that. But in essence, this new provincial legislation allowed for additional units on these single family and duplex zone lots. So it parcels that are of a certain size are now eligible for 3 to 6 units in different configurations. And the diagrams that you see in the slide really are trying, we did some technical analysis to really understand on different kinds of lots in Port Moody that would be eligible, how on the left-hand side, how 4 dwelling units on a single family lot could be achieved. And then on the right-hand side, how lots with 6-unit entitlements, how those could be achieved with different kinds of access, whether they have laneway access or access from the front, whether they're corner lots. So there's a number of different configurations that we've had some help from a consultant to really understand how that might play out on various types of lots in Port Moody. So here's the map that shows the distribution of those single detached and duplex lots in Port Moody with different kinds of entitlements. So the green shaded lots are lots that are now entitled for redevelopment up to 4 dwelling units. And the purple shaded lots are entitled for development up to 6 units. And the purple areas are distinguished from the green areas because of their proximity to bus stops that have frequent bus service, so every 15 minutes. And all of these parameters were dictated by the province in terms of identifying which lots are eligible in what areas and for how many units. And so this map is really intended to kind of show you in one place what that distribution looks like I just want to point out that the bright yellow shaded lots, those are lots that are exempted from the small scale multi-unit housing legislative requirements because they're lots that are designated by a heritage designation bylaw, or they're part of a heritage revitalization agreement. Also, just want to take this opportunity to kind of point out those larger round circles that are blank just to the right side of the screen. Um, those are the transit-oriented areas, again, dictated by provincial legislation that are based on distances from the Moody Center and from the Inlet Center SkyTrain stations. But we'll get into a little bit more around that a little bit later. Right now, actually. So here's a map of the transit-oriented areas. Just to orient you, the bullseye of the circles on the left-hand side is the Moody Center SkyTrain station, and the center of the circle on the right-hand side is the Inlet station. And so, what the province did and what their intention was to really focus increased density closest to rapid transit, in our case, the two SkyTrain stations. The legislation required Port Moody to pass a bylaw designated transit-oriented areas by the end of June of last year. And so staff undertook that process to do that. And the different colors denote different density and height entitlements. So the inner circle is a 200-meter radius from the SkyTrain station, and the density allocation is up to 20 stories and 5 floor area ratio, which is the measure of floor area to the size of the property. And then the middle ring is a distance of 400 meters from the station, and the entitlements there are up to 12 stories or 4 floor area ratio. And then the pink shaded areas are within the 800-meter distance of the SkyTrain stations, and their entitlements are up to 8 stories or 3 floor area ratio. There are some blank properties that you'll see kind of in the center closest to Moody Center SkyTrain station. Those are exempted from the legislation as they're zoned industrial. And so that is one of the exemptions that the province allowed for in order to retain industrial properties. And this slide is really intended to kind of show you the same information, just in a different way. So the prescribed distances at the 200-meter distance, again, up to 20 stories and 5 floor area ratio. So really it's an apartment form. The tier that's 400 meters, 200 to 400 meters away from the SkyTrain station, with the allowable height up to 12 stories and 4 floor area ratio. So it's really high-rise or mid-rise, depending on how you define mid-rise. And then the tier furthest out between 400 and 800 meters, allowing up to 8 stories or 3 floor area ratio. So it is a classic sort of mid-rise form. And these are mostly apartment type dwellings. Okay, now we'll get into the proposed updates to different neighborhood plan areas that are being proposed as part of the 2025 update. The first area is we're referring to as Inlet Center, that includes Coronation Park. So for the purposes of this engagement, we're including both of these neighborhoods together. The entire area will continue to serve as a pedestrian-oriented, higher density development area with a mix of land uses. This draft OCP identifies a new study area in Coronation Park. I can actually use my cursor, I think, here. So it's a study area in this area here that we're referring to as Area C. where we're proposing a new set of policies for consideration prior to contemplating any new development in this particular area. So just to orient you, the area where you're seeing some construction activity is right here in Coronation Park. Um, this area was already identified for a similar type of development previously in the OCP, and so now we're looking at this area C over here, um, just contemplating that if there would be an application to redevelop this area, we wanted to identify a set of policies that would really guide what that needed to look like or needed to consider. The next area we're referring to is the Murray Street Boulevard. It's the south side of Murray Street, across from Rocky Point Park. The current official community plan envisions the Murray Street corridor as mixed employment designation. So that's up to 6-story forms with industrial at the bottom, a second-story office, and up to 4 floors of residential. It's a form that you see currently under construction, the Moody Yards building. That's kind of at the east end of Murray Street. What as part of this 2025 update, we're engaging on now as for designating a section of Murray Street industrial corridor back to urban industrial with no residential components. So it's this pink shaded area here, the distance that you see here, going back to an urban industrial with no residential designation. And then this particular block here retains that mixed employment. It is the area that's under construction currently. Um, uh, and the reason for this is really to try to preserve a limited industrial base that we currently have. So all of these properties on the south side of Murray Street are all zoned light industrial. So by changing the designation in the official community plan to industrial, it really signals in the future trying to retain this area for future industrial uses as well. The next area is the Moody Center Transit-Oriented Development Area. This area has been in the official community plan since 2017, and it's just to orient you, the SkyTrain station is right here. And the Moody Center, we call it the TOD area, is really intended to be a complete community focused on transit-oriented development with buildings up to 26 stories. So this vision, as I mentioned, has been in place since 2017 in the OCP, and so it was our transit-oriented development area identified prior to the provincial legislation. And what we're proposing as part of the 2025 update is an extension of this area slightly to the east to include this portion of Moody Center, really extending all the way to Buller Street. So right now it ends at Electronic. The proposal is to extend it over to Buller Street, and it really is to fully encapsulate a distance of 400 meters from the transit station. The next area we're referring to is Moody Center neighborhood, which excludes the transit-oriented development area, which you can see here is this rectangle, this white rectangle in the center that we were just discussing on the previous slide. So Moody Center as a larger neighborhood is envisioned as an area that will continue to evolve and grow into a livable, pedestrian-oriented, complete community. One point that we'd like to highlight is that we're proposing the addition of a cultural node at Kyle Center, which includes adjacent properties, really aligning the future redevelopment of this area with the city's commitment to arts, culture, and heritage, and to really enhance the vibrancy of this neighborhood and create a new focal point, a new node. So the next area that we've identified as part of this 2025 update, we're referring to as the south of St. John Street Special Study Area. It's outlined here in black. And as you can see, it's directly south of St. John's, and a large proportion of this area is overlaid with the provincial transit oriented areas. And So those are both the transit-oriented circles associated with the Moody Center Station as well as the Inlet Center Station. Um, and really what we wanted to point out by identifying this as a special study areas is with this new provincial legislation in those areas that you see in the circles, it's really kind of changed the vision for this area of Moody Center beyond what was ever contemplated in the previous OCP or what we probably would have contemplated moving forward had the provincial legislation not been passed. And so our attempt to really understand the full impact and also the opportunities that come along with these new designations is to create a special study area where we can really do that more detailed planning. As part of this particular update, we're proposing some broad policy objectives that support the creation of a complete community for this study area. These are outlined in more detail on the Engage page. You can see a full set of the policies that we're proposing. The more detailed special study area plan is something that we'll continue to work on after this OCP update is completed by the end of this year. And then we'll be bringing that back out for engagement before considering it as a future amendment to the official community plan. The next area is the Seaview neighborhood. So the current vision for the Seaview neighborhood focuses on retaining the existing character and land use for the area. So really this is primarily residential with a mix of single detached homes, townhouses and apartments, mostly in a three-story form with some commercial development along Clark Road. This is, of course, except for the area that was recently approved, the Portwood development or Woodland Park, which is, I'll just point it out with my cursor, which is really this part of Seaview. And that has redevelopment potential for between 6 to 19 stories. As part of this 2025 update, we've updated the vision for this area that includes some higher density, more affordable and diverse housing options in 8 select areas that are outlined here on the slide, where we expect redevelopment to happen gradually over time in 3 to 6 story forms from its current primarily single family forms, and then also adding some additional locally serving commercial development in a few new areas here that are shaded in this kind of browny color. And this is consistent with what we have heard through the Seaview neighborhood dialogue that we held in 2023. We really heard from the folks who grew up there that they want to stay in the neighborhood and that a single family form is not affordable for them. So they're really looking for other more diverse housing forms, generally that would be more affordable than a single family option. And lastly, the last neighborhood area that we're referring to here is Oceanfront District. While we're not proposing any updates to the vision for this area, it is a neighborhood where we're likely to see some significant change occur over the next 25 years. And just to remind everyone, the current vision for this area in the official community plan remains as a vibrant, high-density, mixed-use neighborhood along the water's edge with buildings up to 38 stories. So the current vision, there's no proposal to change the current vision as part of this official community plan update. Okay, so in terms of next steps in our process, this is the third citywide engagement opportunity we've had over the last couple of weeks. After today, we have on Saturday a self-guided walking tour in a pop-up tent at Kyle Center, where we'll have more information on the small-scale multi-unit housing and transit-oriented areas that were part of the provincial legislation. And the walking tour is really to help uh, folks really orient themselves to areas that are impacted in different ways as a result of the provincial legislation. We're also having a specific youth open house on May 2nd. And just a plug for the community survey that's open right now and is accessible on the city's Engage page. So that'll be open until May 4th. And you'll notice that the questions that are in the survey relate directly to the information that's been presented on the slides at a high level. And then there's also links to more detailed information on that Engage page that you can access as you do the survey. And then after our engagement concludes on May 2nd, we'll be working to summarize the engagement results, so the feedback that we receive at the events that we've held, as well as the survey results. And we'll be presenting that back to council in early June. And that information will be used to provide additional updates to the official community plan. A new draft that we hope to present to council in July of 2025. So we're on a pretty quick timeline in order to meet our end of year deadline. This would mean likely a public hearing on the official community plan. It's a bylaw in the fall and winter of this year. So that's the ideal timeline that we're working towards. I think with that, I'll hand it back to True.
Great. Thank you so much, Mary, for that presentation. And for those who joined partway through, this is just a reminder for you that our presentation is being recorded and it'll be posted to the project webpage. So feel free to check that out in the coming weeks. So now that leads us to the Q&A portion of tonight's session. And so the Q&A tool should now be live for you. And we invite you to submit questions that you have about the OCP planning process or the proposed changes presented tonight. You can also upvote other questions that you want answered. So I'll just make sure that that Q&A is live for people. And I know we're lucky to have many staff from different departments with us tonight who can help answer questions. So Mary, if it works for you, I'll start by directing questions first to you, and then you can answer or popcorn them around to others.
Great. Thanks.
So maybe as folks are submitting their questions, just a reminder that that Q&A button is at the bottom of your screen on that bottom panel. And if you click the question mark icon, a Q&A box should pop up and you can submit your question directly to the team. So as we wait for folks to submit any questions they have, I'll start with one that has come up a little bit throughout our other information sessions. And that's just on explaining a bit more about the housing target order, and especially in comparison to the housing needs report. And so kind of the housing units that are required by this new provincial legislation that Port Moody is planning for.
Great. Thanks, True. And I'll look to Liam if he wants to jump in anytime if I've missed anything. So maybe I'll just start off. So the housing targets that you're referring to are part of the Housing Supply Act that the province passed, where it identified specific 10-year targets for municipalities. And it wasn't all municipalities at first. It was there was a group of 10 municipalities in the first cohort, and that included Port Moody. And so those are specific completion targets. So those are targets of occupiable units, new ones in the city that we need to track over time, and provide uh, basically update reports to the province on a regular basis, to show how we're making progress towards achieving those specific completions, um, and as well as projects that we have in the pipeline that will contribute to that over time. The housing needs report, and the housing, the need to identify the housing needs, the 5-year and 20-year housing needs, is part of a different legislation. It came a little bit later, and those are capacity numbers. Those are numbers that the city needs to show that we can, through our official community plan land use designations, that we have the capacity to achieve those specific numbers that were derived as part of initially our interim housing needs report, which is the first requirement we had. And so the official community plan needs to include a statement that confirms that the city, that according to the official community plan designations, we will be able to reach that particular 20-year housing need. And perhaps I'll just maybe refer this over to Liam if he wants to provide more information on how the two might relate to each other.
Thanks, Mary. You did a very good job actually already explaining it. Just for probably one of additional piece of information. The way that the province has set it up is that the housing targets are a portion of the housing needs as well. Essentially, the 100% target of the Housing Supply Act equals to about 75% of the housing needs target. So you can kind of think of it as being something that the city needs to build over time, and then we have that maximum target at the 5-year as well as at the 20-year for the OCP.
Great. Thank you both. Um, so we know that this planning process is focused on Port Moody, and we're planning for Port Moody as its own municipality, but we also know it's not an island. And so wondering how this OCP will coordinate with or consider surrounding municipalities and their planning efforts, for instance, like in Coquitlam.
Great. Thanks, Drew. Maybe I'll start, and if Suzanne wants to add anything additional, maybe we can go to her afterwards. So the same provincial legislation that applies to us also applies to our neighbors. And so they're doing a similar process of updating their zoning bylaws and their official community plans to show how they're going to be meeting those new housing needs um, figures. Try not to use target because it gets a little bit confusing between all the different figures that we have before us. And as part of our process, ongoing, it's always part of our process when we're updating our official community plan, is that we engage with our neighbors to let them know that we're going through this process. We invite opportunities to meet with them and discuss our plans, particularly where we have interface with other municipalities, and also just having an understanding, because roads don't really respect boundaries. And so often, we're trying to understand how development, say in Coquitlam or beyond, traffic wise, may impact routes that carry through Port Moody. And so our engineering staff are in contact with their counterparts in Coquitlam, especially to really kind of understand and coordinate any traffic improvements that might be necessary, or to plan for and really understand the impacts of growth over time on those existing corridors. And from a kind of planning point of view, we in particular Coquitlam, we meet with our counterparts there on a number of issues, including the official community plan, as a lot of what affects us affects them as well. And as a Tri-Cities region, we tend to work together to try to provide a number of different kinds of services to people in this sub-region. So all to say is that we work closely and we try to understand what's happening around us. Um, Part of that inlet center transit-oriented area that impacts Port Moody also impacts a portion of Coquitlam on just beyond our eastern border. And so Coquitlam, their timeline's a little bit different than ours, but we'll as they're doing that more detailed planning in that particular area, we anticipate meeting with them and trying to understand what that looks like and also what kind of access into those areas is necessary as they're shared roadways between us. I'll just maybe see if Suzanne wants to add anything to that question.
I think you covered that really well.
Okay.
And maybe a follow-up here that I see in the chat is you mentioned kind of the impact perhaps on Coquitlam or neighboring municipalities based on Port Moody's TODs, specifically the Inlet Center. And what about the impacts on Port Moody neighborhoods near the boundary from other TOAs? For instance, Glen Eyre neighborhood that's near Burquitlam Station. So if a Port Moody neighborhood is near a transit station in another city's TOD, what's the impact on that neighborhood's density?
Yeah, Burquitlam in particular, yeah, is one of the, as you mentioned, probably has the greatest impact on Glen Eyre. Um, our understanding is we have an idea of what at that interface with Port Moody, what Coquitlam is proposing in terms of building form. So we try to keep that in mind as we're looking to how the Glen Eyre community or the lots in particular that border onto there might be affected. And so we'll continue to try to, meet with them and really understand what that looks like, and then understand whether we need to adjust our future plans in response to that to complement that kind of development that might be happening if it's quite different from what's happening on the Port Moody side. Yeah, so I don't know if I have anything else to add to that, and I'll see if others want to add anything. Okay, maybe I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. And just a reminder for folks and attendees that if you do have a question, please feel free to use the Q&A tool that's in the bottom panel of your screen. In the meantime, though, I'll just maybe continue with a couple more questions that were top of mind for folks at previous sessions. One is around the impact on parks and green spaces with this potential added density to Port Moody. We know it's top of mind for folks, and thinking about how will we ensure there is enough parks and green spaces and access to those natural spaces that we love with this added growth around the city.
Okay, maybe I can start with that one, and then I don't know if Aaron, who's Director of Parks and Environment, wants to add anything. So specifically around the area that we identified as the south of St. John Street area, where we're trying to get a better idea of the level of impact, what that might look like given the new provincial legislation. The more detailed planning that we're doing as part of the south of St. John Street plan is really trying to also understand what are some ideal areas for additional park space, for how we connect those park spaces together, how we look to provide more green space in the public realm, so in along streets as well. And then also as part of that is really looking to what are the opportunities through redevelopment of the sites that now have these higher density entitlements, how can we leverage the new development that's happening there to contribute to those new green spaces and new amenities that are going to be needed by the growth that's anticipated to happen in the area. So we expect that to come forward likely in 2026 or late 2025, probably 2026, given how busy we are with the OCP. But again, we'll be presenting that out to the public, so there'll be an opportunity to provide some input specifically on that part of the plan and how we're looking at providing those amenities as part of new development. Maybe I'll just see if Erin wants to add anything to that.
Sure, Mary, thank you. I guess I would point those interested to our almost across the finish line parkland strategy and upcoming town hall specifically on this issue focused on Moody Center, but I'm happy to answer questions more broadly for the city in terms of how we're sort of updating the targets for parkland services citywide, and through that process went neighborhood by neighborhood to look at what's working and what's needed, and what additions of new parkland we would need, and then again, just sort of where to focus. It is going to be a lot of change in a shorter period of time, so we're really trying to be strategic and thoughtful, and again, work really hand in hand with the OCP process to align the vision and enable the delivery of increased park services to support the new population.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marian. Thank you, Erin. So Mary, in your presentation, you talked about some kind of future planning that will come out of this OCP work. And one of those specific initiatives is the South of St. John's special study area. So wondering if you could speak a little bit more about that study timeline and how that when that will be completed, and if there maybe are other opportunities to engage specifically on that plan.
Great. Thanks, True. Yes, so that work is ongoing, but realizing our deadline for the OCP is coming up quicker than we can accommodate completing the South of St. John's plan. We know it will extend likely into early next year, but we have done some work to at least identify some broad policy objectives, and that's what's being included as part of this 2025 update to the OCP. It's really the kind of the framework that we'll be building upon in the more detailed plan that we expect to be coming forward again in 2026, the first half of 2026, and we'll have an engagement, specific engagement with the public on that plan, where hopefully you'll be able to understand it's the parks and open spaces that we're hoping to achieve, as well as new opportunities for east-west and north-south connections through the area, and really being mindful of this area isn't flat. There's some challenges from topography and also access. So we're really trying to understand what are the ideal areas for redevelopment and also for amenities, and to be intentional where we identify those opportunities as part of that plan. So stay tuned for more on that one. We will have a similar kind of engagement page for that through Engage Port Moody, and then you can stay up to date by visiting the page and also subscribing to any updates. So whenever we make any updates to the page, you'll get a message from the city just alerting you to that. But I'm sure we'll have lots of social media that are sort of our typical process. So folks will be aware when those opportunities come up.
Thank you, Mary. So maybe I'll just ask one more question, and then we can wrap up the webinar. And if anyone does have more questions, they can feel free to either send an email to the email on the project webpage, or submit their feedback on the survey. So in the kind of the face of more events that we're seeing climate related, how does the plan or future planning processes consider what might happen in the case of perhaps catastrophic or disaster related or climate related disaster, such as a big earthquake or tsunami, potential flood risk? And just wondering how this plan, or again, kind of future planning efforts, might address those climate related events.
Great. Yeah, that's a good question. So currently in our official community plan, we have specific development permit areas for hazardous lands. So you can look at our current official community plan, and we have a map that identifies different types of hazardous lands in Port Moody, whether that's related to steep slopes or areas of soil liquefaction, which are more susceptible to earthquakes, or steepland sediments. We have a whole bunch of things in Port Moody actually to think about, areas that are more prone to debris flow, and also just other flooding potential. So all of those areas have been identified, and the different hazards require different types of information and studies to be conducted when new development is proposed. So typically those are in the form of a geotechnical report, which kind of outlines the potential hazards, and then makes recommendations in relation to the type of development that's proposed. So those recommendations can be related to construction methods, flood control, flood control levels. So the height of livable areas in relation to potential flooding. Also, we'll make recommendations at times related to the siting of buildings on a particular lot if there's a portion of a lot that maybe has soils or other things that place structured at a higher risk. And so all of those recommendations that are made by in the geotechnical report by an engineer are then meant to be reflected in the plans and in the construction that's proposed as part of new development to ensure that it's safe for the use intended. So that's the kind of the current process related to hazardous lands in Port Moody, or where new development could happen. And then we're also currently going through a process to develop a coastal flood management strategy. And that's really looking more closely at areas along the inlet, and really understanding in a 2050, 2100, and 2200 time horizon under different conditions that take into consideration storm surge or king tides and general anticipated sea level rise. What are the areas that are anticipated to be impacted? And how can we develop guidelines to ensure that any new development that's coming forward takes those risks into consideration, to kind of basically make sure that however we're developing now is mindful and is resilient to those potential future impacts. And so we anticipate that work's ongoing. We anticipate it to be completed by the end of the year, and there will be separate public engagement on that part. But that will also result in its own development permit area for those specific areas that are anticipated to be impacted, so that again, we can make sure that any new development in those areas is safe and resilient to climate impacts.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mary. We have a question here in the chat, specifically about a couple of neighborhoods that might not have been highlighted as much in the presentation, but based on the new OCP or the draft OCP, it looks like in Glen Eyre and Heritage Mountain neighborhoods, this will remain low density. It looks like single family housing. So the question here is, do we see future changes to these areas to further increase density in Glen Eyre and Heritage Mountain areas?
Yeah, that's a good question. So those areas in particular on the map that we showed that had the green shaded lots and the purple shaded lots, you can see that predominantly Glen Eyre and Heritage Mountain, those single detached lots are shaded green, I believe. So that's up to a 4-unit dwelling unit entitlement as part of the new provincial legislation. And so at this particular time, that's what we're classifying under low density residential. Those are the major changes that we're anticipating seeing in those areas right now. And again, it's not mandating those particular changes. It's just reflecting that new entitlement and the possibility that individual lots now they actually have the zoning in place to redevelop to those new density entitlements. So Seaview is a little bit sort of adjacent to Glen Eyre, and that's where we were looking to really identify specific sites where we thought we could go beyond the small scale multi-unit housing into more of a townhouse and low-rise apartment form. So that's the extent of what we're looking at as part of this OCP.
Thank you, Mary. And just looking for staff, if there's anything else anyone wants to add before we conclude the Q&A portion of tonight's event. Any final comments? Wonderful. Well, with that, maybe Mary, I'll invite us to maybe reshare the next step. So as a reminder of the timeline.
Great. Yeah, so, putting in another plug for the remaining events that we have going on as part of this engagement on the OCP. So if folks are inclined and they're in the Kyle Center area, visit us in our tent. It'll be, I think it's a blue tent where you can ask us more questions and see more information on small scale multi-unit housing and transit oriented areas. And again, also just really encouraging you to fill out the community survey. It's those results in particular that, it's nice to have. We can summarize those and present those back to council and the community to kind of get a real gauge on the particular changes that we're proposing. There's also opportunities in that survey to provide feedback on any topics that are of interest. So we encourage people to take advantage of that opportunity. Again, it's on Engage Port Moody. You'll see it as the first project that pops up once you put Engage Port Moody in your search function. And then again, just reminding everyone, we'll be bringing back a summary of the engagement results in the first half of June, and then trying to go through that and incorporate it where we can as part of the next draft of the OCP. And that is our intention is to bring that to council in July. Towards the second half of July before the summer break. And then in order to make our timeline, we'd be looking at fall or winter public hearings. So somewhere in October or November. And again, you can stay up to date anytime at portmoody.ca/OCP. And as True mentioned earlier, there's a specific 2050 at portmoody.ca email that you can access through the Engage page, that you can ask any questions that might come to mind later after this session, and staff will do our best to get back to you as soon as we can with those answers.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Mary, and thank you, staff, and thank you so much to those who took time out of their Wednesday evening to be with us today. I hope you have a great rest of your night. See you soon.
Thanks, everyone.